So I think Christians have written a lot of excellent stories, even if it's too easy to say, "Oh, that person goes to church, they wrote a book, it must be great."
Mhm,
I don't think that doesn't make it beautiful just because they profess to be a Christian.
mhm,
In terms of reading stories by explicit non-Christians, I would go back to lots of times it's super helpful in terms of practicing finding out what someone else's worldview looks like
mhm,
and what categories they had to borrow from Christians just to write their story,
mhm,
especially ones written in the last couple hundred years. Almost all of them are in some way they got to be what they are as a story because of Christian things in there.
mhm.
So maybe they hate Christianity, maybe they hate that there's a God. They're still writing against that, and you learn things from that. Going back before, like, even Jesus, so in some of our omnibus classes at ECS, reading things like the Odyssey or the Iliad, those are not Christian stories at all. Homer didn't profess to be a Christian. Couldn't have been a Christian anyway because they weren't called Christians until Antioch, whatever covenantalists say. Like, there is a verse that says when they were first called Christians. So we don't just go back to the Old Testament and say that they were all Christians, even if they were looking forward to Christ.
I mean,
However,
that I gotta get that in there too.
yeah, so wasn't Christian in any way, wasn't even God fearing in terms of the Lord for Homer, but completely helpful to get a sense of what it was like living in a religious culture where there were many gods who didn't get along and how actually unstable, unhappy, and completely no certain kind of peace available in that sort of world.
Mhm,
That's actually really helpful to think about. One of the reasons when we had omnibus for adults and we looked at all of the things we were going to read in terms of ancient history leading up to about the time that Christ came. We called that omnibus tenebras because of the darkness of all the stories. So they're begging for some kind of gospel. They're begging for a savior. So they had some presented sort of heroes in their stories, but they weren't perfect. They weren't sinless. They couldn't actually then offer atonement as a spotless lamb
mhm,
like Jesus does. So as a Christian, it was really helpful, not just entertaining, it was actually edifying to read stories from people who were longing for a thing that they had no idea where to find it,
mhm.
that
Right.
Christ then actually resolves.
Yeah.
So before Christ came, those stories have their own angle of benefit. And then post Christ, again, it's hard to imagine, especially in Western civilization, which we're mostly reading English things. You can
Mhm,
read Russian novels in Russian, so you get that added benefit. But still, post Christ, the world has been changed by God taking on flesh and
mhm.
dying and then defeating death and sin.
Right.
So all the stories, depend on that arc in some way, even if they hate it. So yeah, I think we can read them. I'm not talking about, pornographic or emotionally pornographic
Mhm,
or
mhm.
those kinds of. I'm not saying go read those to get
Right,
benefit
right.
and see how enslaved people are. So I have not read 50 Shades of Grey. I don't read though. I don't read Twilight or horror things
Mhm.
for a variety of reasons. So there are, I guess, limits we would say to pagan
Mhm.
stories that would be beneficial. But as a category, I wouldn't eliminate that as
Yeah.
a
Yeah.
potentially useful thing.